The debris field of the Skagerrak skirmish drifted in the silence of the void. A grim mosaic of shattered titanium and frozen propellant. It was a graveyard of kinetic ambition. Through the reinforced viewport of a passing cruiser, the aftermath looked like a glittering cloud of diamonds. But up close, it was nothing but jagged edges and the preserved corpses of sailors from two species. Spinning endlessly in the dark, the war between the United Earth Coalition and the Aeleri Dominion had been grinding on for 10 years, consuming fleets and star systems with the insatiable hunger of a singularity. The camera of history would linger there, on the grand tragedy of the front line, before cutting violently away to something smaller, colder, and infinitely more cruel. Millions of kilometers from the flashing strobes of combat. Asteroid Station 49 hung in the darkness of the Perseus Veil. It was a barren rock, devoid of atmosphere, devoid of color, and stripped of hope. There were no grand battles here, only the low hum of atmospheric scrubbers and the silent scream of neglected biology. This was a prisoner of war camp, though it appeared on no official military maps. It was a black site, funded by the omnipresent Helios Directorate, and it housed a very specific population. Inside the station, the air was kept frigid to suppress the metabolic rates of the inmates. In cell block C, Lysera stood with her back to the containment field, her spine straight despite the weakness trembling in her legs. She was an Aeleri, a species known for their ethereal grace and the bioluminescent markings that mapped their skin like living constellations. Once, those markings had flared with the brilliant azure and violet of her caste, the sign of a high-ranking envoy and officer. Now, they were dim, barely a smolder of gray light beneath her pale, translucent skin. She looked at the women huddled on the floor behind her. There were 30 of them in this block, curled together like dying embers trying to share a single spark of heat. Their collarbones jutted sharply against their tunics. Their eyes, large and dark, were sunken deep into their skulls. A drone whirred overhead, a sleek black disc with a red optical sensor. It paused, scanning the group. Compliance check. A synthetic voice droned. Posture deviation detected in prisoner 7-2. Correct immediately. One of the younger Aeleri, a girl who had been a communication specialist, tried to push herself up from the cold metal floor. Her arms shook violently, unable to support her own skeletal weight. She collapsed with a soft thud. The drone lowered itself, a shock prod extending from its chassis with a crackle of electricity. Lysera moved. She did not run, for she did not have the energy to run, but she stepped between the girl and the drone with a fluidity that starvation had not yet stolen. She stared directly into the red lens. "She is correcting," Lysera said, her voice raspy but steady. Her common was perfect, accented only by the harmonic resonance typical of her vocal cords. "Save your battery." The drone hovered, processing. Behind the barrier, 2 human guards in gray tactical armor watched with bored expressions. One of them held a nutrient brick, a dense calorie-rich slab of processed protein. He tossed it casually toward the ventilation grate, just outside the energy field. It landed with a heavy clack, 3 meters away from the prisoners, 3 meters of impossible distance. "Look at them," the guard sneered, leaning against the bulkhead. "Supposed to be the superior species. They look like stray dogs waiting for scraps." The other guard laughed, adjusting the strap of his rifle. "Don't waste the brick." "Miller. Management says they are on a fasting protocol. Creates clarity, they said." He kicked the nutrient brick further away into the shadows of the corridor. Lysera watched the food slide across the floor. Her stomach did not even clench anymore. That sharp pain had faded days ago. replaced by a hollow, consuming numbness that felt like her body was slowly digesting itself. She did not look at the food. She looked at the guards, her dim markings flickering with a sudden sharp spike of amber, the color of contempt. She would not beg. She would die before she gave them the satisfaction of seeing her kneel. A heavy vibration shuddered through the station's hull, signaling the docking of a transport shuttle. Captain Elias Ward stepped onto the flight deck of Station 49, his boots hitting the grating with a heavy, metallic rhythm. He paused, taking a breath of the station air. It smelled of recycled oxygen, burnt circuitry, and something stale and metallic that reminded him of a morgue. He rubbed his eyes. He was 40 years old but looked 50. His face lined with the gray exhaustion of a man who had seen too much surgery and not enough healing. He had been a combat medic on the front lines of the Theta campaign, patching up soldiers who were blown apart minutes later. That was before the incident, before he had refused to sign off on a falsified casualty report that tried to hide a friendly fire incident as enemy action. His integrity had earned him a transfer. Not a court-martial, which would have been too public, but a quiet reassignment to logistics oversight. A desk job, a punishment disguised as a promotion. He was here to audit the supply chain of a prison camp he hadn't known existed until 3 days ago. A young lieutenant was waiting for him by the airlock, looking nervous. "Captain Ward, we weren't expecting you until the next rotation." Elias adjusted the data pad tucked under his arm. "Efficiency is the mother of victory, Lieutenant. Take me to the command center. I want to see the manifests before I even unpack." The walk through the station was long and sterile. The walls were stamped not just with the United Earth Coalition emblem, but with the stylized sunburst logo of the Helios Directorate. It was everywhere, on the air scrubbers, the door panels, even the crates stacked in the corridors. Helios was a private defense contractor that had grown so large during the war it effectively functioned as a fourth branch of the military, one with deep pockets and zero oversight. Elias hated them. He hated the way their equipment always worked perfectly while standard issue gear failed. He hated the way their representatives smiled like sharks in boardrooms. He sat in the temporary office assigned to him, surrounded by holographic displays of spreadsheets. It was supposed to be a routine audit. Count the beans, sign the forms, leave in 2 days. But Elias Ward had a bad habit of noticing things. He scrolled through the caloric intake logs. The station was listed as housing 200 prisoners. The food shipments from Earth were massive. High-grade protein synthesized for Illyri biology, crates of vitamin supplements, hydration salts. According to the logs, these supplies were being received and expended on a daily basis. He frowned, tapping a command to cross-reference the waste disposal output. If 200 prisoners were eating 3,000 calories a day, the biological waste output should have been consistent. But the waste reclamation numbers were flatlining. They were barely producing enough biomass to account for the station's human crew. "Where is the food going?" Elias whispered to the empty room. He pulled up the security directives. Usually a POW camp operated under the Geneva-Helsinki Convention protocols. But every security order here was flagged with a red override code. Helios Priority Alpha. The chain of command didn't route to the military high command on Earth. It routed to a corporate server node in the Centauri sector. Elias stood up, grabbing his cap. He didn't like mysteries. Mysteries in war usually meant body bags. He navigated the corridors toward the detention level. The air grew colder the deeper he went. The hum of the containment fields became a pervasive itch in his teeth. He passed a checkpoint, flashing his clearance. The guards eyed him suspiciously but let him pass. When he entered cell block C, the silence hit him first. A prison block should have been noisy. Shouts, protests, the clatter of metal. This place was silent as a tomb. Elias walked down the central gangway. On either side, transparent energy fields shimmered with blue static, separating him from the cells. He looked inside the first cell and stopped. He had seen dead men. He had seen soldiers with their limbs blown off. But he was not prepared for this. The women inside were skeletal. Their skin, usually a pearlescent white, was gray and papery, stretched so tight over their bones that he could see the ridges of their skulls. They moved like ghosts, slow and dreamlike. He walked further, his heart beginning to hammer a heavy rhythm against his ribs. He stopped in front of a larger cell. Lysera was seated on a low bench, her hands resting on her knees. She sensed him before she saw him. She lifted her head slowly. Elias stared at her. Even in this state, she was striking. The wings tattooed across her shoulder blades, no, not tattoos, biological markings, were faint, pulsing with a weak, rhythmic light. She turned her gaze to him. Her eyes were large, entirely black except for the iris which seemed to hold a swirling nebula of violet. There was no fear in those eyes. There was exhaustion. Yes, there was pain. But mostly, there was a sharp, piercing assessment. She looked at his uniform, his rank insignia, and then his face. Her expression curled slightly, a mix of contempt and stubborn pride. She looked at him as if he were the one in the cage. Elias felt a sudden crushing wave of shame. He was wearing the uniform of the people doing this. He turned abruptly, marching back toward the lift. He needed to speak to the commander. Now. Major Kincaid's office was spacious, warm, and smelled of real coffee, a luxury that cost more than a sergeant's yearly salary. Kincaid was a heavy-set man with a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite and then eroded by years of indifference. He was sitting behind his desk, watching a sports broadcast on a secondary monitor when Elias stormed in. "Captain Ward," Kincaid said, not bothering to rise. "You're making a lot of noise for a logistics officer." Elias slammed his hand down on the desk, rattling the coffee cup. "I just walked the block. Kincaid, those prisoners are dying." Kincaid sighed, pausing the game. "They are securing the perimeter. They are starving." Elias snapped. "I checked the manifests. We have enough food in the cargo hold to feed an army, yet I'm looking at severe malnutrition. Class 4 cachexia. Why aren't they being fed?" Kincaid leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight. He gestured vaguely to the ceiling. "Above my pay grade, Captain, and certainly above yours. Those aren't just POWs, they are assets. Helios has specific protocols for stress testing their physiology." "Stress testing," Elias repeated, his voice rising. "This isn't a stress test, it's a slow execution, it's a war crime. Major..." Kincaid laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "War crimes apply to people, Ward. The Illyri are biological weapons. They have psionic capabilities we barely understand. The directors want them docile. They want them on the edge. A hungry Illyri can't focus enough to melt your brain or phase through a wall. We're keeping the galaxy safe." He stood up, his bulk towering over Elias. "Listen to me. Captain, you are here to count boxes and sign forms. If you verify the inventory is present, your job is done. How we utilize that inventory is a command decision. Do not confuse your arithmetic with morality." Elias stared at him, his jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. He wanted to hit the man. He wanted to smash the expensive coffee mug into Kincaid's face. But he knew that would only get him thrown into a brig, and it wouldn't help the women in the cells. "I will audit the inventory," Elias said, his voice deadly quiet. Every single crate. Do that, Kincaid said, sitting back down, and close the door on your way out. Elias did not sleep that night. He sat in his quarters, the lights dimmed, watching the security feeds on his portable terminal. He had bypassed the standard encryption. It was lazy coding, typical of officers who thought no one was watching. On the screen, the interior of cell block C was bathed in the grainy green of night vision. The temperature in the block had dropped another 5 degrees. He watched the women pile together in the center of the cell, a tangle of limbs seeking shared warmth. He zoomed the camera in. Lysera was awake. She was sitting on the edge of the pile, stroking the hair of the young girl he had seen earlier. Elias turned up the audio gain, filtering out the hum of the ventilation. Human architecture is so linear, Lysera was whispering. Her voice was weak, but there was a dry, melodic humor in it. They build boxes to live in, boxes to travel in, and boxes to put their food in. They are terrified of curves. A weak murmur of laughter came from the pile. And their food? Another voice asked, sounding like dry leaves rustling. Lysera smiled, a ghost of an expression. I suspect they eat gravel mixed with salt. That is why they are so heavy. They have rocks in their bellies, but do not worry. When we get out of here, I will make you a broth of sun moss and nectar. When? The girl whispered. Not if. When? Lysera affirmed. Elias watched, a lump forming in his throat. She was starving to death, her body consuming its own muscle mass to keep her heart beating, and she was telling jokes to keep her soldiers from fading into the dark. He looked at the digital clock on his terminal. It was 0300 hours. The shift change. The automated systems would be running the corridors. Elias stood up. He wasn't a hero. He was a man who counted boxes, but he was also a medic, and the first rule of medicine was do no harm. The second rule, the one they didn't teach in school but learned in the mud, was ignoring pain is the same as causing it. He grabbed his datapad and keyed in a new requisition order. He authorized a Class A medical inspection for Block C, flagging it with a fluctuating biohazard warning that would keep the human guards at the far end of the corridor. Then he went to the storage bay. The automated loaders were silent. Elias bypassed the lock on one of the Helios-branded crates. The lid hissed open. Inside were pouches of high-nutrient Aleri paste, rich in the copper-based amino acids their biology required. It smelled earthy and sweet, like wet soil and cinnamon. He didn't just take the pouches, and he found a heating unit. He mixed the paste with hot water, stirring it until it was a warm, thick porridge. He loaded 20 bowls onto a floating grav cart. His hands were shaking. If Kincaid caught him, this was a court-martial. It was treason. It was the end of his career. He pushed the cart into the hallway. The walk to the cell block felt like miles. The station was sleeping, breathing in mechanical, rhythmic sighs. When he reached Block C, the guard post was empty. The men retreated behind the blast doors due to his fabricated biohazard warning. Elias keyed the override for the containment field of the main cell. The blue energy flickered and died. The sound woke them. 30 heads snapped up. Lysera was on her feet instantly, moving in front of the others, her stance defensive despite her frailty. She expected a beatdown. She expected an interrogation. Elias pushed the cart into the room. The smell hit them before he did. The scent of warm food wafted through the sterile, cold air. It was an overpowering sensory shock. The women flinched, some recoiling against the back wall as if he had brought a weapon. Elias didn't speak. He couldn't trust his voice. He picked up a bowl and set it on the floor. Then another, then another. He worked quickly, lining them up. The Aleri stared. They didn't move. They looked at the steaming bowls, then at him, their eyes wide with terror and confusion. "It's poison," one of them hissed. "A trap." Elias looked up, meeting Lysira's gaze. "It's not poison," he said, his voice rough. "It's nutrient mash. Standard requisition." Lysira looked at the bowl at her feet. She could smell the nutrients, the iron, the sugars. Her body screamed at her to dive for it, but her mind was a steel trap of discipline. "Why?" she asked. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the steam. Elias stood up, backing away to the doorway to show he wasn't a threat. "Because you're hungry." One of the women, the young one who had collapsed earlier, couldn't help herself. She crawled forward, her movements jerky and desperate. She reached out a trembling hand and dipped a finger into the porridge. She put it to her lips. Her eyes went wide. She let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. She grabbed the bowl with both hands, lifting it to her face, drinking it down with frantic, messy gulps. "It's real," she choked out. "It's warm." The dam broke. The other women scrambled forward. The discipline shattered under the weight of biological imperative. They grabbed the bowls, weeping, shaking. The sound of spoon against bowl, of swallowing, of gasping breaths filled the room. One woman, holding the bowl with both hands like a holy chalice, looked up at Elias. Tears were streaming down her face, glowing faintly with her own bioluminescence. "A week," she whispered, her voice cracking. "It has been a week without food." The phrase rippled through the room. A week without food. They began to cry. Not the soft weeping of despair, but the loud, heaving sobs of relief that comes when a torture finally stops. They huddled over the food, protecting it with their bodies, eating as if the bowls might vanish at any second. Lysira did not eat yet. She stood amidst her weeping sisters, holding a bowl but not lifting it. She watched Elias. Her eyes were shimmering with moisture, tears she refused to let fall. She looked at the scene, the chaotic, heartbreaking spectacle of proud warriors reduced to sobbing children by a bowl of mush. And then she looked at the human who had done it. She walked to the barrier where Elias stood. She was close enough that he could feel the static charge of her skin. "Is this a game?" she asked, her voice low and dangerous. "Is this to make us soft? To make us grateful so we answer your questions?" Elias shook his head. "No game. I checked the logs. I saw what they were doing." Lysira searched his face. She was looking for the lie. She was looking for the cruelty. She found only a tired, sad man with gray eyes. "You are disobeying orders," she said. "The fat one, the commander. He enjoys our hunger. He doesn't know," Elias said. "And if he finds out, I'll deal with it. Eat, please." Lysira held his gaze for a second longer, a silent exchange of assessment. Then, slowly, she lifted the bowl to her lips. She took a sip. Her shoulders dropped an inch. The tension that held her upright wavered, replaced by the sheer physical relief of nourishment. She lowered the bowl. "Thank you," she said. It was stiff, formal, but genuine. Elias nodded once, then turned and reactivated the field. He walked away quickly before he could break down himself. Back in his office, the adrenaline crashed. Elias sat in the dark, his hands trembling. He had just crossed a line. He had interfered with a Helios operation. He turned to his terminal, and he needed to know why. Why starve them? Why not just kill them or interrogate them? Starvation was inefficient. It damaged the brain, ruined the memory. If they wanted intelligence, this was the wrong way to get it. He began to dig. He used an exploit code he had learned from a signals intelligence officer years ago. A back door into the deeper layers of the station's mainframe. He bypassed the supply logs and went straight into the root directory of the Helios partition. It took him an hour to crack the encryption. When the file opened, the light from the screen washed over his face, cold and blue. Project, Wither. Subject, behavioral modeling and propaganda capture. Objective, induce extreme physiological distress to catalog degradation of Illyri psionic resistance. Secondary objective, capture footage of feral behavior for public dissemination to support narrative 4, the barbaric other. Elias read the words, and a chill went down his spine that had nothing to do with the station's air conditioning. It wasn't negligence. It wasn't just cruelty. It was a movie set. He clicked on a subfolder. There were scheduled recording times, scripted incidents. The order to starve them wasn't about saving money or punishment. It was to make them look like animals. To make them desperate enough to fight over a scrap of bread while a hidden camera rolled, so Helios could broadcast it to the human worlds and say, "Look at these monsters. This is why we must keep fighting. This is why you must keep buying our weapons." Elias leaned back, the truth settling on him like a shroud. He had thought he was fighting a war against an alien enemy. But here, in the dark of Asteroid 49, he realized the enemy wasn't the woman with the glowing wings in the cell. The enemy was the logo stamped on the crate he had just opened. And by feeding them, by restoring their dignity, he hadn't just broken a rule. He had sabotaged the production. He looked at the screen, at the blinking cursor. He was in the crosshairs now. The chain of command couldn't save him, because the chain of command was the weapon. Elias Ward reached into his drawer and pulled out his sidearm. He checked the charge pack, slid it back in, and placed the weapon on the desk. He wasn't going to sleep tonight. Major Kincaid did not scream. Screaming implied a loss of control, and Kincaid was a man who prided himself on the absolute, crushing exertion of authority. Instead, he spoke with a volume that vibrated the very fillings in Elias Ward's teeth, his voice a low, grinding tectonic rumble that filled the sterile command office. "You possess a dangerous confusion regarding your station, Captain," Kincaid said. He was standing by the panoramic window that overlooked the asteroid's jagged gray horizon, his back to Elias. He turned slowly, the artificial light casting deep shadows in the craters of his face. "You are here to count crates. You are here to ensure that the inventory matches the spreadsheet. You are not here to play nursemaid to a cage full of biological assets." Elias stood at attention, his eyes fixed on a point just above Kincaid's left shoulder. He had expected this. The automated alerts from the supply bay would have flagged the unauthorized removal of the nutrient mash within minutes. "I was conducting a spoilage assessment, sir." Elias lied. His voice was steady, though his heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The crates in question showed signs of seal failure, per Regulation 7 Alpha. Compromised organics must be tested for toxicity before disposal. I used the prisoners as the control group to ensure the batch wasn't lethal to Illyri physiology before flagging the rest for incineration. It was a thin lie, stretched transparent over a backbone of insubordination. Kincaid stared at him, his eyes narrowing into slits. He took a step forward, invading Elias's personal space with the oppressive heat of his large, dense body. "Do not quote regulations to me, Ward. I know who you are. I saw your file. You are the man who wouldn't sign the casualty reports on Theta Prime. You have a conscience. That is a liability in a war zone. It is a cancer." Kincaid leaned in, his breath smelling of coffee and stale tobacco. "If you interfere with Helios protocols again, if you so much as give them an extra cup of water without a direct order signed in triplicate, I will not court-martial you. That takes too much paperwork. I will have you reassigned to a penal battalion on the Scorch Rim. You will be clearing minefields with a spoon. Do you understand me?" "I understand, sir," Elias said, keeping his face a mask of bureaucratic submission. "Get out of my sight. Go count your boxes, and if the count is off by a single microgram, you're done." Elias saluted and turned on his heel, marching out of the office with rigid precision. He held his breath until the blast doors slid shut behind him. Then, he exhaled, a long, shaky breath that rattled in his chest. He had bought time. Not much, but enough. He walked straight to the logistics hub, his mind racing. Kincaid thought he had cowed him. Kincaid thought Elias was a broken man looking to ride out the war in a quiet corner. And Kincaid was right about the broken part, but he had underestimated just how stubborn a man could be when he had nothing left to lose. Elias sat at his terminal and cracked his knuckles. If Kincaid wanted the numbers to balance, Elias would make them balance. He began the systematic falsification of the camp's entire inventory. It was tedious, precise work, the kind of data manipulation that required a surgeon's touch. He flagged perfectly good crates of high-protein ration bars as oxidized or contaminated by hull breach. He marked gallons of hydration fluids as lost to evaporation leaks. He created a phantom paper trail of accidents, spoilage, and vermin infestation that accounted for thousands of calories disappearing from the stockpile. Then, under the guise of waste disposal, he rerouted the supplies. He tagged the crates for the incinerator, but changed the destination code in the automated loader drones to deliver them to a maintenance airlock adjacent to Cell Block C, an airlock he had quietly disabled the sensors on. It was a logistics magic trick. On paper, the camp was hemorrhaging supplies due to incompetence. In reality, the ghost inventory was piling up just where he needed it. Over the next 10 days, the atmosphere in Cell Block C began to shift. It was subtle at first, like the slow turning of a season, but to Elias's trained eye, it was miraculous. The gray, papery quality of the Illyri skin began to recede, replaced by the faint pearlescent sheen that was natural to their species. The hollows of their cheeks filled in, not completely, but enough that they no longer looked like skulls wrapped in parchment. But the most striking change was the light. The Illyri were bioluminescent, their emotional and physical states broadcast through complex glowing patterns on their skin. When he had arrived, they had been dark, their lights extinguished by starvation. Now, color was returning. Soft pulses of azure and indigo rippled across their arms when they moved. Elias watched them through the monitors during his night shifts. They were moving differently. The lethargy was gone. They were stretching, performing slow, rhythmic exercises that looked like a cross between yoga and martial arts. And they were laughing. It was a strange sound in the sterile misery of the prison, a melodic, harmonic chittering that bounced off the metal walls. He zoomed in on a group of 3 women sitting in a circle. One of them was mimicking the lumbering, heavy-footed walk of the human guards, puffing out her cheeks and grunting. The others were shaking with silent mirth, their shoulder markings flashing bright teal, the color of amusement. Lizara sat apart from the games, watching the door. She looked better, stronger. The lines of pain around her mouth had softened, and the wing-like patterns across her back glowed with a steady, low-level silver light. She was vigilant, her eyes constantly scanning the perimeter, checking the other women, assessing the guards. When Elias entered the block that evening, pushing a cart of medical waste that was actually full of thermal blankets and electrolyte packs, the silence didn't fall as heavily as it used to. The fear was receding, replaced by a wary curiosity. He stopped at the barrier. Lysera approached him, her movement fluid and predatory. She crossed her arms, the silver light on her skin pulsing once. "You are persistent, human," she said. Her voice was stronger now, carrying the natural resonance that made Illyri's speech sound like it was being spoken by two voices at once. "I am thorough," Elias replied, unlocking the small transfer hatch. He slid a box of supplies through. Hydration salts and topical analgesic for the bruising on Prisoner 4's legs. Lysera looked at the box, then at him. She did not take it immediately. "You are feeding us," she said, her eyes narrowing. "You are healing us. My sisters are beginning to think you are a saint. They forget that farmers often heal the livestock before the slaughter." Elias paused, his hand resting on the cold metal of the cart. "Is that what you think this is?" "I think that in war, kindness is usually a trap," Lysera said. She stepped closer to the field, the blue energy buzzing between them. "Why should I trust a man who wears the uniform of the people who bombed my city?" "You shouldn't," Elias said simply. He met her gaze, refusing to flinch. "Trust is a luxury. Survival is a necessity. Take the medicine." "Lysera." She held his stare for a long moment, searching for the deception. Finally, she nodded, a sharp, singular motion. She took the box. The interactions became a ritual. Every night, Elias would come with his cart of stolen goods. He would adjust the environmental controls to raise the temperature by 2 degrees, blaming it on a sensor malfunction in his reports. He would stand by the barrier while they ate, answering questions about the medication, listening to their complaints about the confinement. One night, he brought something different. He had found a crate of civilian-grade protein bars in the officers' mess storage. They were chocolate-coated, sticky, and sickeningly sweet, a comfort food for soldiers who missed home. He slid a tray of them through the hatch. The Illyri gathered around, staring at the brown rectangular blocks with deep suspicion. One of the women picked one up, sniffing it delicately. She recoiled, her nose wrinkling. "It smells of burnt chemicals and decay," she said, looking at Elias with horror. "Is this a bonding agent?" "It is chocolate," Elias said, fighting a smile, or at least a chemical approximation of it. "It's sweet. It's meant to make you feel better." Lysera picked one up, turning it over in her long fingers. Her markings flashed a skeptical yellow. "You are trying to fatten us," she announced to the room, her voice deadpan. "I have read about this. Humans consume the flesh of soft, sweet creatures. He is marinating us from the inside." The other women gasped, dropping the bars. Elias blinked. "No. That's not..." Lysera looked at him, her face completely serious, before the corner of her mouth twitched upward. A tiny, almost invisible smile. She took a bite of the bar. She chewed thoughtfully, her eyes widening slightly. "Oh," she murmured. She took another bite, faster this time. "It is acceptable," she declared. She looked at the other women who were still backing away in horror. "Eat it. It is not marinade. It is pure glucose. It will give you energy to complain about the ventilation." The women tentatively picked up the bars. Within seconds, the sound of wrappers tearing filled the cell. One of them, the young comms specialist, finished hers in 3 bites and looked at Elias with wide, glowing eyes. "Do you have more of the brown bricks?" she asked. Elias chuckled, a rusty sound he hadn't made in months. "I'll see what I can do." As the women ate, the atmosphere in the block softened. Lysera remained by the barrier, finishing her bar with deliberate slowness. "You have a strange way of making war, Captain," she said softly. I'm not making war, Elias said. I'm doing inventory. She looked at him, her gaze traveling over his tired face, the gray at his temples. She lowered her voice so the others wouldn't hear. I was not always a soldier, she said. Before this, before the fire, I was a cultural attaché. I was part of the delegation sent to the Luna Summit. Elias froze. The Luna Summit was the flashpoint, the diplomatic meeting that was supposed to ensure peace, which ended in a catastrophic explosion that killed the human ambassadors. The Earth government had blamed Illyri extremists. The war started 6 hours later. I thought everyone in that delegation was killed, Elias said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Lysera shook her head. No. We were not killed. We were intercepted. Before we even reached the station, our shuttle was boarded by human mercenaries. They wore no flags, but they had military codes. They took us. Then I saw the news feeds. I saw the explosion I was supposed to be dying in. She leaned in, her voice trembling with a suppressed rage. It was a stage play. Elias. We were never there. The explosion was real, the dead humans were real, but the Illyri attack was a fabrication. Someone wanted this war. Someone needed it. Elias felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He had heard rumors, dark web conspiracy theories, drunken ramblings in officer clubs, but hearing it from a witness was different. Helios, he whispered. Lysera's markings flared a dark, angry crimson. They were the ones who boarded us, their equipment. I remember the sunburst logo on the crates they used to shackle us. Elias looked down at his hands. They were trembling. He clenched them into fists to stop the shaking. I was on Theta Prime, he said, his voice hollow. We were pinned down. My unit took heavy fire from a ridge. We called for air support. Helios drones arrived. They didn't target the enemy ridge. They targeted the village in the valley below us, a neutral zone. He looked up, meeting Lysera's eyes. I watched them level it. And then, 10 minutes later, a news crew, embedded with a Helios security detail, arrived to film the Illyri atrocity. The angles were perfect. The lighting was dramatic. They had the story written before the dust settled. He let out a bitter laugh. I refused to sign the report. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm counting boxes on a rock in the middle of nowhere. Lysera watched him. She saw the tremor in his hands, the haunting in his eyes. She saw a man who was drowning in the same sea of lies that she was. She reached out, pressing her hand against the energy field. The blue light crackled around her fingers. Why do you care? She asked. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of a scream. You are one of them. You benefit from their lies. Why do you risk your life to feed us? Why does it matter if we starve? Elias looked at her hand, separated from him by inches of deadly energy. He looked at the delicate bioluminescent patterns tracing the line of her throat, glowing with a soft, rhythmic pulse that matched her heartbeat. He felt a pull, a magnetic, undeniable gravity that terrified him. Because I am tired, he said, his voice cracking. I am tired of watching people die for a profit margin. I am tired of being a part of the machine that eats the world. He stepped closer, close enough that he could feel the static of the field on his skin. He looked directly into her violet eyes, and because when I look at you, I don't see an enemy. I see the only honest thing in this entire damned sector. The air between them grew heavy, charged with something that wasn't electricity. Lysera's breath hitched. The patterns on her skin shifted, swirling into a soft, chaotic violet, the color of confusion, and something else, something warmer. She did not pull her hand away. That night, Elias did not go back to his quarters. He went to the server room. He locked the door and engaged the privacy baffles. He sat at the main terminal, his fingers flying across the holographic interface. He was done with inventory. He was done with spoilage reports. He initiated the deep dive hack he had been prepping for days. He used a cascading algorithm to bypass the standard military firewalls, slipping into the hidden partition of the Helios mainframe that sat underneath the station's operating system like a tumor. The data streamed across his retinas, logistics schedules, weapon schematics, financial transfers. He found a folder marked Phase 2, Conversion. He opened it. The file wasn't about converting the prisoners to a cause. It was about converting them into biology. Subject Illyri females demonstrate unique psionic resonance when under extreme duress. The report read, Proposed application, bioneural wetware for autonomous drone guidance. Extraction of neural tissue requires subjects to be in a state of heightened emotional and physical collapse to maximize synaptic firing. Elias swallowed bile. They weren't just testing weapons. They were harvesting the pilots. He scrolled further. There was a shipment schedule. Asset transfer. Station 49 to Helios Research Facility Beta. T-minus 48 hours. 2 days. They had 2 days before ships arrived to take Lysera and the others to a lab where they would be vivisected to build better guidance chips for missiles. He closed the file and opened the media folder. It was a library of nightmares. High-definition video files professionally edited. He clicked one. It showed a group of Illyri soldiers slaughtering a human medical convoy. The camera work was shaky, found footage style, but the focus was too good. Elias paused the video. He zoomed in on the Illyri leader. The movement was wrong. The center of gravity was too high. The armor didn't fit right at the joints. It was a human in a suit. He clicked another. A human squad executing Illyri children in a temple. He watched the human sergeant give the order. He recognized the sergeant. It was a Helios mercenary he had seen in the canteen just yesterday. It was all fake. All of it. The war was a production. A meat grinder kept spinning to sell tickets and ammunition. And Lysera, the peace delegation. He realized with a jolt of horror why this camp existed, why they were being starved but kept alive. They were the loose ends. Lysera wasn't just a prisoner, she was the proof. As long as she was alive and discredited, locked away in a black site, the lie held. If she died, questions might be asked. But if she disappeared into a research lab, if her brain became a component in a missile, the secret died with her. Elias grabbed a portable data drive. He downloaded everything. The schedules, the memos, the videos. He had to show her. He hurried back to cell block C. It was technically the sleep cycle. The lights dimmed to a dull amber. The guards were dozing at their station, lulled by the routine. Elias slipped past them, moving with the quiet urgency of a man walking on a wire. He reached Lysera's cell. She was awake, sitting on the floor, staring at the door as if she had been waiting for him. "Wake them up," Elias whispered. Lysera saw the look on his face, the pale, sweat-slicked terror. She didn't ask questions. She made a sharp, clicking sound in her throat. The other women stirred, waking instantly, their training kicking in. Elias pulled a small, palm-sized projector from his pocket. He knelt by the barrier and aimed it at the blank metal wall inside the cell. "I need you to see this," he said. He played the footage. It was a montage of the files he had found, the staged attacks, the Illyri killing humans, the humans killing Illyri, the memos detailing the conversion project. The silence in the cell was absolute, heavier than the vacuum outside. Lysera watched the wall. She watched a grainy video of a massacre she remembered reading about in the news, a massacre that had justified the bombing of a moon colony. She saw the Illyri attacker stop after the cut and take off his helmet, revealing a human face, laughing as he wiped sweat from his forehead. She saw the memo about her own sisters, bioneural wetware, extraction. Her body began to shake. It wasn't the trembling of hunger. It was a vibration that seemed to come from the core of her being. Her bioluminescence flared, not in pulses but in a steady, blinding surge of white-hot light. The other women were weeping, covering their mouths to stifle screams of rage. But Lysera did not weep. She turned to Elias. Her face was a mask of incandescent fury. The light pouring from her skin was so bright it cast harsh shadows across Elias's face. "They play with us," she whispered. The words sounded like grinding glass. "My brothers, my city. It is a game to them? A commercial?" "Both sides," Elias said, his voice thick with grief. "The Helios Directorate. Your own extremists. They're working together. They're keeping the fire burning so they can sell the water." Lysera stepped to the barrier. She slammed her palm against the field. The energy shrieked, sizzling against her skin, burning her palm. But she didn't pull back. "If I get out of here," she hissed, her eyes locking onto his, wide and wild with a terrifying promise. "If I survive this, I will burn it down. All of it. I will tear their sky apart." The smell of ozone and burning flesh filled the air. She was hurting herself, the pain grounding her rage. Elias didn't think. He stepped forward. He raised his own hand and pressed it against the field, directly opposite hers. The barrier hummed between them, a millimeter of lethal energy separating their palms. He could feel the heat of her rage, the radiation of her light. "I know," he said, "and I'm going to help you." Their hands remained pressed together, separated by the blue wall. The air around them crackled. It was a moment of absolute, terrifying connection. The barrier meant to keep them apart became the conductor for a shared, burning hatred of the lie they had both lived in. In the reflection of the energy field, Elias saw his own face overlaid with hers, human and alien, captor and prisoner, both of them realizing that the only thing that mattered anymore was the truth and the heat of the hand on the other side of the glass. "We leave when the transfer ship arrives," Elias said, his voice steady now. "We leave, or we die trying." Lysera looked at him, the white light of her anger softening to a fierce, resolve-hardened gold. "Then we leave," she said. She pulled her hand back. The skin was blistered, but she didn't look at it. She looked only at him. "Get us weapons, Elias Ward, and I will get us the war they actually deserve." The red light on the communications console did not blink. It burned. It was a solid, unyielding crimson eye that dominated the logistics office, accompanied by a high-frequency whine that drilled directly into the base of the skull. Captain Elias Ward stared at the screen. The header was emblazoned with the solar flare emblem of the Helios Directorate, flanked by the highest security clearance codes in the United Earth Coalition database. Directive Omega 9. Subject: immediate asset relocation. Origin: Helios Central Command, Project Wither. Destination: redacted, Sector 0. Elias felt the blood drain from his face, leaving his extremities cold and numb. He knew what Sector 0 was. In the shadowy geography of black-budget operations. Sector 0 wasn't a place, it was a disposal site. It was where biological experiments went when the data gathering was finished and the vivisection began. The message was brief. A heavy transport cruiser, the Aegis, was inbound. ETA, 12 hours. The orders were explicit. All biological assets were to be prepped for cryostasis. It was a death sentence. No, Elias corrected himself as he read the fine print regarding neural preservation. It was worse than death. They were going to strip mine Lysera and her soldiers for their nervous systems. The door to his office hissed open. Major Kincaid filled the frame, a data pad in his heavy hand. The commander looked pleased, a rare expression that sat uneasily on his granite features. "Pack your bags, Ward," Kincaid said, his voice booming with satisfied efficiency. "The auditors are satisfied. The lab boys want their specimens. The Aegis will be here by 0600 hours. Elias forced himself to stand, to keep his hands from shaking. "That is a short timeline. Major, the prisoners are still recovering from malnutrition. The stress of cryostasis in their current state could cause cardiac collapse." "Good." Kincaid grunted. He tapped a command into his pad. "Save the lab technicians the trouble of killing them. I have already issued the order to suspend all rations immediately. We need their metabolic rates in the basement. If they are weak, they won't fight the sedation protocols." Elias felt a surge of nausea. "You are cutting the food. Now? I am prepping the cargo." "Captain," Kincaid stepped closer, his eyes cold and hard. "And you will assist. I want you to run a final medical inventory. Verify that all 30 assets are breathing and fit for transport. If one of them dies before they get on that ship, it comes out of your pension." Kincaid turned and marched out, barking orders into his comms unit about sedation dosages and restraint cuffs. Elias stood alone in the silence of his office. The hum of the ventilation system sounded like a countdown. He looked at the screen, at the redacted coordinates. He had 12 hours. The camp transformed within minutes. The relative calm of the last week, bought with Elias's stolen rations and falsified reports, was shattered. Guards in riot gear flooded the corridors. The temperature in cell block C was dropped by another 10 degrees, plunging the cells into an Arctic freeze designed to force the reptilian parts of the Aeoliri brain into dormancy. Elias moved through the chaos like a ghost. He carried his medical kit, his badge flashing the authorization codes Kincaid had just given him. He reached the security checkpoint outside Block C. "Medical review," Elias told the sergeant. "Commander's orders. I need to clear them for stasis." The sergeant grunted, eyeing the kit. "Make it quick, Captain. They are getting rowdy. They know something is coming." Elias stepped through the blast doors. The scene inside tore at his heart. The women were huddled together again, shivering violently. The warmth and color that had returned to their skin over the past week was fading, drained away by the sudden return of terror. Lysera stood at the barrier. She was not shivering. She was vibrating with tension, her eyes fixed on the door. When she saw Elias, her expression did not soften. It hardened into a mask of betrayal. She knew. Elias approached the control panel. He keyed in a sequence that looped the video feed for the internal camera and disabled the audio pickups. It was a trick he had learned in the Intel Corps. A 10-second loop of an empty room played on repeat. He deactivated the field on Lysera's cell only. "Room 2, he said, his voice flat. "Examination." Lysera didn't move. "You are cutting the rations," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "The guards are preparing shackles. Was this the plan? Elias? Feed us so we are healthy enough to be sold. Get in the exam room." "Lysera!" Elias hissed, glancing at the camera he had just tricked. "Now! I cannot talk to you here." She searched his face, looking for the lie. She saw only desperation. She signaled to the others, a subtle hand gesture that meant wait, and stepped out of the cell. He marched her into the small medical bay adjacent to the block and sealed the door. As soon as the lock engaged, the mask fell. Elias slumped against the metal counter, breathing hard. "It's a transfer," he said, the words spilling out in a rush. "A ship is coming. The Aegis. It's a Helios Black Ops transport. They are taking you to a facility in the unmapped sectors." Lysra stood in the center of the room, her arms wrapped around herself against the cold. "A research facility?" "A slaughterhouse," Elias corrected brutally. "They want to harvest your neural tissue. They think they can use your psionic sensitivity to guide autonomous drones." Lysra's face went pale, her bioluminescence flickering and dying out, leaving her skin gray. "They want to turn us into components? They don't see you as people. Lysra, they never have, and the order is already signed." She looked at him, and for the first time, he saw true fear in her eyes. Not the fear of death, but the fear of erasure, of being unmade. "Does my government know?" she asked. Elias shook his head. "I don't think so. I think Helios is playing both sides. Your disappearances are just statistics to your high command. Missing in action." Lysra closed her eyes. She took a deep breath, and Elias watched the transformation happen. The fear didn't leave, but she swallowed it. She metabolized it into fuel. When she opened her eyes, they were clear, sharp, and terrifyingly focused. The diplomat was gone. The soldier was back. "How many guards on the night rotation?" she asked. Elias blinked, caught off guard by the shift. 12, 4 at the perimeter, 2 in the block, 6 in the barracks. The automated systems? Helios standard encryption? But the grid is unstable. I can crash it. And the ship? When does it dock? 0600. Lysra began to pace the small room, her bare feet making no sound on the metal. "We cannot fight 12 men with assault rifles. Not in this condition. We need a distraction. We need weapons. We need a miracle," Elias said, rubbing his temples. "The airlock codes are rotated every hour. Even if I get you out of the cell, the hangar is on the other side of the station." Lysra stopped pacing. She turned to him. She stepped close, invading his personal space, bringing with her the scent of ozone and the faint, spicy smell of the Lyri physiology. "You are the logistics officer," she said softly. "You control the doors. You control the alarms." "I do," Elias said. She took another step. She was close enough now that he could feel the radiant heat of her markings, which were beginning to glow with a slow, steady amber light. She looked up at him, her dark eyes searching the depths of his soul. "Elias," she said. Her use of his name was a shock, intimate and heavy. If you do this, there is no going back. You will be a traitor to your uniform. You will be hunted by your own people until the day you die." "I know," Elias whispered. She raised her hand, slowly, with infinite care. She reached out. She did not touch his face. Instead, she leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his. It was an electric shock. Her skin was warm, vibrating with a low-level energy that hummed against his skull. He froze, his breath catching in his throat. In a Lyri culture, this was not romantic, it was deeper. It was a sharing of mind, a gesture used between soldiers before a suicide mission, or between lovers before a long separation. It was an acknowledgement of a shared soul. "Why?" she breathed, her lips inches from his. "Why are you willing to burn your life for us?" Elias closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the sensation of her, the reality of her life beating against his. "Because the uniform doesn't mean anything if it covers a hollow man," he said, his voice trembling. My loyalty isn't to the flag anymore. It's to the living. It's to you. He opened his eyes. She was staring at him, her gaze fierce and wet with unshed tears. The air between them was thick, charged with a tension that was terrified and deeply, painfully erotic. He wanted to kiss her. He wanted to pull her into him and hide her from the universe. But he knew that if he crossed that final line now, he would never be able to let her go. They pulled back, just an inch, the space between them vibrating with the ghost of the kiss that hadn't happened. "Then let us burn it down," Lysera whispered. Elias nodded, his resolve hardening into steel. "Here is the plan." The Aegis docked with a heavy metallic groan that reverberated through the station's hull. It was a massive, ugly ship, designed for hauling cargo, not passengers. In the command center, Major Kincaid checked his chrono. 0600, status report, he barked. "Prisoners are prepped," a lieutenant replied. "Sedation protocols initiated." "Wait, what is it? I'm getting a reading from Block C. Atmospheric sensors are spiking." Kincaid frowned. "Spiking? Sir, the system is registering a level 5 biohazard. Airborne pathogen detected. It looks like a hemorrhagic virus." "That's impossible," Kincaid snapped. On the screen, the sector turned a flashing, angry red. Automatic containment protocol engaged. The computer's synthetic voice announced, "Venting atmosphere in Sector 4. Unlocking emergency bulkheads for evacuation." "No!" Kincaid roared. "Override! It's a glitch. Override denied. Biohazard protocols are hard-coded." In the supply office, Elias Ward sat at his terminal, his fingers flying across the keys. He wasn't just triggering an alarm, he was conducting a symphony of chaos. He watched the code cascade down the screen as he rewrote the station's reality. Door 4 Alpha. Open. Security drones. Targeting parameters reset. Friendly fire enabled. Gravity plating. Randomize. He hit the final key. In cell block C, the containment fields vanished. Lysera didn't wait. As soon as the blue wall died, she was moving. She didn't look like a starving prisoner anymore. She looked like a Valkyrie. "Up!" she screamed, her voice cutting through the confusion of the waking women. "Move!" The guards at the end of the corridor were panicking, their helmets screaming warnings about a virus that didn't exist. They were looking at their wrist comps, not the cells. Lysera hit the first guard before he even raised his rifle. She moved with a blur of speed, using the momentum of her gaunt frame to turn her body into a whip. She drove her palm into his throat, collapsing his trachea, and snatched the stun baton from his belt. She spun, throwing the baton to the young comms specialist, who caught it with surprising dexterity. "Form up," Lysera ordered. "Wedge formation. We are leaving." The women, fueled by adrenaline and the lingering calories of Elias's stolen rations, surged forward. They were weak, yes, but they were Illyri. They were faster than humans, and they were fighting for their lives. Elias grabbed his sidearm and sprinted out of his office. He had to get to the hangar. He had to prep the shuttle before the Aegis crew realized what was happening. The station was a nightmare. Strobing red lights turned the corridors into a disorienting rave. The gravity plating was glitching, shifting from 1G to 0G and back again in sickening lurches. Elias bounced off a wall as the floor suddenly became the ceiling, then slammed back down as gravity returned. He rounded a corner and skidded to a halt. Major Kincaid stood between him and the hangar bay blast doors. The commander was holding a heavy pulse rifle. He wasn't looking at his datapad anymore. He was looking at Elias. "I knew it," Kincaid growled. His face was purple with rage. "I knew you didn't have the stomach for this, Ward. But I didn't think you were a traitor." "Move, Kincaid," Elias said, raising his pistol. "The station is locking down. You can't stop this." Kincaid laughed. A dark, ugly sound. I don't have to stop it. I just have to kill you. Then I'll vent the block manually and sweep up the mess. Kincaid fired. The pulse round slammed into the bulkhead next to Elias's head, showering him with sparks. Elias dove behind a crate of supplies, one of the very crates he had falsified. He fired back, the sharp crack of his kinetic pistol lost in the roar of the alarms. Kincaid advanced, firing methodically. He was a tank of a man, ignoring the flickering gravity, using his mag boots to stay anchored. He shredded Elias's cover. Elias scrambled back, but he was cornered. He raised his gun for a final shot, but Kincaid was too fast. The Major kicked the weapon out of Elias's hand, crushing his fingers. Elias cried out, clutching his shattered hand. Kincaid grabbed him by the throat and slammed him against the wall, lifting him off his feet. "You think you're a hero?" Kincaid spat, his face inches from Elias's. "You're a bug. Helios will erase you. They will erase the records. They will erase these aliens. And tomorrow, the war will go on exactly as planned." Kincaid squeezed. Black spots danced in Elias's vision. He clawed uselessly at the massive hand crushing his windpipe. Suddenly, a shadow detached itself from the ceiling. Lysera dropped from the ventilation duct above them. She didn't make a sound. She landed on Kincaid's back, her legs wrapping around his torso, her arm hooking under his chin in a sleeper hold. Kincaid roared, thrashing like a bear. He released Elias, reaching back to grab the alien woman. Lysera didn't let go. She leaned back, using her leverage to hyperextend his spine. Her markings flared a blinding white. Elias hit the floor, gasping for air. He looked up to see the struggle. Kincaid was strong, but Lysera was fighting with the desperate precision of an apex predator. She drove her elbow into the nerve cluster at the base of his neck. Kincaid's legs gave out. He crashed to his knees, then face-planted onto the deck, unconscious. Lysera stood over him, heaving, her chest rising and falling rapidly. She snatched his pulse rifle. She aimed it at the back of his head. Her finger tightened on the trigger. "Do it," Elias wheezed, rubbing his throat. Lysera hesitated. She looked at the unconscious monster who had starved her sisters. The hate in her eyes was hot enough to melt the hull. Then, she lowered the weapon. "No," she said, her voice shaking with the effort of restraint. "Dead. He is a martyr. Alive, he is a witness. We need him to answer for this." She turned to Elias and extended a hand. "Can you run?" Elias took her hand, his good one. "I can run." They sprinted for the hangar. Behind them, the sounds of battle echoed. The other Illyri were holding the corridor, buying them time with stolen weapons and sheer ferocity. They burst onto the flight deck. A small maintenance shuttle sat on the pad, its engines cold. Elias vaulted into the cockpit. He began the pre-flight sequence, his injured hand throbbing. "Start the APU, check the fuel pressure." Lysera stood at the ramp, waving the others in. "Come on, hurry!" The women flooded into the shuttle. 10, 15, 20. The blast doors at the far end of the hangar began to close. Kincaid's override codes were finally kicking in. "Wait!" Lysera screamed. 3 Illyri women were still running across the flight deck. They were the weakest ones, the ones who had been closest to death. They were moving too slowly. The heavy Durasteel doors slammed shut with a finality that shook the floor. Lysera watched through the closing gap as her sisters were cut off. She saw them turn to face the pursuing guards, raising their empty hands in a final act of defiance before the metal sealed them away. "No!" Lysera lunged for the door, but Elias grabbed her arm. "We have to go!" Elias yelled over the roar of the engines. "The Aegis is targeting us!" Lysera froze. She looked at the sealed door. She looked at the survivors huddled in the cargo hold of the shuttle. Tears streamed down her face, glowing like liquid starlight. She slammed her hand against the control panel. Close the ramp. The shuttle lurched upward and the maglocks disengaged. Elias slammed the throttle forward, and the small craft shot out of the hangar bay, screaming into the vacuum. Outside, the stars were cold and indifferent. The massive bulk of the Aegis loomed above them, its turret batteries tracking their heat signature. "Hold on!" Elias shouted. He threw the shuttle into a violent corkscrew, diving toward the debris field of the asteroid belt. Plasma bolts streaked past the cockpit, silent and deadly. The shuttle shook violently as a near miss clipped their shield generator. Warning alarms blared. Elias fought the controls, sweat stinging his eyes. He wove the ship through the jagged rocks, using the asteroid's own mass to mask their signal. They ran. They ran until the Aegis was nothing but a hateful speck on the rear sensors, until the station was just another rock in the dark. Elias engaged the stealth drive, a prototype system he had installed for logistics security. The engine noise dropped to a whisper. The cockpit grew quiet. He let go of the yoke. His hands were shaking uncontrollably now. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving him hollowed out. He turned his chair. Lizara was sitting in the co-pilot's seat. She was staring out at the star field. Her face was streaked with grime and tears. She looked shattered. "We left them," she whispered. "We saved 22, Elias said softly. Lizara looked at him. Her eyes were dark pools of grief, but beneath it, there was something else. A profound, terrifying bond. They had just committed treason. They had just killed men. They had just severed every tie they had to their former lives. She reached out and took his injured hand. She ran her cool thumb over his swollen knuckles. "You are not a logistics officer anymore. Elias Ward," she said. "No," Elias said, looking at their joined hands, human skin against alien light. "I suppose I'm a fugitive." Lizara squeezed his hand. "We are fugitives," she corrected. She looked back out at the void, at the endless, dangerous galaxy awaiting them. "Plot a course," she said, her voice regaining that command frequency. "Anywhere but here." Elias turned back to the console. He didn't know where they were going. He didn't know how they would survive the week. But as he looked at the woman beside him, glowing softly in the darkness of the cockpit, he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't alone anymore. He punched in the coordinates for the outer rim, and the shuttle vanished into the black, the maintenance shuttle, which Lizara had christened the Broken Wing in a moment of dry irony, shuddered violently as it dropped out of warp space. The view screen, previously a blur of superluminal static, cleared to reveal a vista of absolute devastation. They had emerged on the fringe of the Cygnus Rift, a contested border sector that had been burning for 5 years. In the distance, pinpricks of light flared and died, battleships exchanging railgun fire across the void. The wreckage of 1,000 previous skirmishes formed a glittering, deadly ring around the local star. Captain Elias Ward gripped the yoke, his knuckles white. The stealth drive was whining, a high-pitched complaint that vibrated through the deck plates. "We are running hot," he announced, scanning the instrument panel. "The coolant seals are cracking. If we stay out here, either a patrol will spot our thermal bloom or the reactor will melt through the hull." Lizara stood behind his chair, her hands gripping the backrest. She was looking at the distant battle, her markings pulsing a dim, anxious gray. "We have 18 hours of fuel," she said, her voice tight, "and 22 people sharing air scrubbers meant for a crew of 4. We need a port. Elias." Elias pulled up the navigation chart. It was a mess of red zones, active combat, black zones, destroyed infrastructure, and gray zones, anarchy. He pointed to a small, flickering beacon in the shadow of a gas giant in the Tharis system. "Here," he said. Station 88. It's a smuggler's roost. Neutral ground. Lysera leaned in, her eyes narrowing. Neutral usually means they sell to the highest bidder. If a Helios bounty hunter is there, then we buy them a drink and shoot them under the table, Elias said, forcing a grin he didn't feel. It's our only option. We need fuel, we need air filters, and we need someone who can crack the encryption on these stolen files. Lysera hesitated, then nodded. Set the course. But if they try to sell us, I am taking the station apart. The journey to Theros was a masterclass in evasion. They didn't fly straight. They hopped through debris fields, hiding in the magnetic shadows of ruined hulks. Inside the cramped shuttle, the atmosphere was a strange mix of tension and giddy relief. The 22 Illyri survivors were crammed into every available space. They sat on cargo crates, slept in the airlocks, and meditated in the corridors. They were still gaunt, their uniforms ragged, but they were free. Elias walked through the main hold to check the environmental regulators. He found a group of women examining the exposed wiring of a wall panel with a mixture of fascination and horror. "Why is it orange?" one of them asked, poking a conduit. "Because it's high voltage," Elias explained, gently moving her hand away. "Orange means danger. In our ships, orange means waste disposal," the woman said, wrinkling her nose. "This explains the smell of your technology. It smells like burning copper and bad decisions." Another woman, a former architect named Valera, tapped on a structural support beam. "And the angles. Everything is 90 degrees. It is so aggressive. Do humans hate circles? Do you fear the infinite curve?" "We like things that stack," Elias said, checking the pressure gauge. "Squares are efficient. Squares are sad," Valera corrected. "A square has 4 corners where dust can hide. A circle has no hiding places. It is honest." Elias chuckled. "I'll keep that in mind for the redesign." The women laughed, a soft, chittering sound that made the cramped metal box feel a little less like a coffin. They teased him about his heavy boots, his inability to see in the ultraviolet spectrum, and his need to sleep for 8 hours a day. It was light banter, but underneath it, Elias felt the fragility of it. They were bonding over the absurdity of their survival because the alternative was screaming. Later, in the quiet of the navigation bay, Elias and Lysera stood over the holographic chart table. The blue light of the map illuminated their faces, casting long shadows. "We are drifting," Lysera murmured, tracing a line through the asteroid belt. "The port thruster is misaligned." "I know," Elias said. He leaned over the table to adjust the trajectory, his shoulder brushing against hers. He didn't pull away. Neither did she. He watched her hand move through the hologram. Her fingers were long, elegant, the skin translucent enough to show the faint glow of her veins. She tapped a sector of the map that looked like a chaotic spiral. "Your maps are flat," she said, shaking her head. "You try to force the stars into a grid. Look at this. You have the Z-axis compressed. It's a standard projection." Elias defended, though his mind was less on the map and more on the warmth radiating from her arm. "It makes it easier to calculate vectors. It makes it easier to miss the beauty," Lysera countered softly. She manipulated the controls, twisting the map into a complex, spiraling helix, the Illyri standard. It was dizzying, irrational, and breathtakingly beautiful. The stars didn't look like points on a graph anymore. They looked like a flowing river of light. "See?" she said, looking up at him. "You have to move with the flow. Elias, you cannot just draw a straight line through the universe and expect it to obey you." Elias looked from the map to her face. Her eyes were wide, reflecting the swirling starlight. The playful arrogance was there, but so was a deep, ancient wisdom. "It's beautiful," he admitted, his voice dropping an octave. "Confusing as hell, but beautiful." "Like us?" she asked, a small, teasing smile playing on her lips. "Exactly like you," he said. The air in the bay changed. The hum of the drive seemed to fade. They stood there, shoulder to shoulder, the map forgotten. Elias felt a magnetic pull, a terrifying urge to reach out and touch the glowing pattern on her neck. An alarm screamed through the ship. "Proximity alert!" Valera shouted from the cockpit. "Frigate class, it's Helios!" The moment shattered. Elias and Lizara sprinted to the cockpit. The view screen showed a sleek, black ship emerging from the shadow of an asteroid, its weapon ports open. It was a stealth hunter, designed for one thing: erasing problems. "They found us," Lizara hissed. "How?" "They must have tracked the engine signature," Elias said, throwing himself into the pilot's seat. "Strap in." The shuttle wasn't built for combat, but Elias flew it like a fighter. He threw the broken wing into a violent dive, skimming the surface of a massive iron asteroid. The Helios frigate opened fire, green plasma bolts sizzling past their canopy, melting the rock around them. "Shields are down to 40%, Valera yelled. "I can't shake them," Elias gritted out, wrestling with the unresponsive yoke. "They're too fast." Lizara jumped into the co-pilot's seat. "Reroute power from life support to the rear deflectors," she ordered. "That gives us 5 minutes of air," Elias argued. "Better to suffocate than burn," she snapped. "Do it!" She began punching commands into the console, her hands moving with a speed Elias couldn't match. She wasn't fighting the ship's drift. She was using it. She synced the thrusters to the erratic spin of the asteroid field, predicting the debris path in a way that defied human logic but matched the spiral map perfectly. "Turn hard to port," she shouted. "Now!" "That's a collision course, trust me." Elias didn't hesitate. He slammed the stick left. The shuttle swung around a jagged spire of rock just as a missile slammed into it, detonating in a blinding flash. The explosion masked their thermal signature for a split second. "Cut the engines," Lizara ordered. Elias killed the power. The shuttle went dark, drifting silently into the cloud of expanding debris. They held their breath. The silence in the cockpit was absolute. Outside, the Helios frigate swept past, its sensors sweeping the empty space where they had been seconds ago. It paused, hovering like a shark, then accelerated away, chasing a phantom echo. Elias exhaled, his head falling back against the seat. "Spiral navigation," he muttered. "I'll be damned." Lizara looked at him, her markings pulsing a rapid, triumphant violet. "I told you," she said, breathless. "Straight lines get you killed." They drifted into Station 88 2 hours later. The station was a sprawling, chaotic hive bolted to the side of a hollowed-out moon. It was a neon nightmare of docking clamps, flickering signs in a dozen languages, and the constant traffic of ships that didn't want to be scanned. They docked in a low-rent bay that smelled of ozone and fried food. Elias handed out cloaks to the women. "Keep your heads down," he warned. "Cover your markings. If anyone asks, you're pilgrims from the Theta sect. You've taken a vow of silence." Lizara pulled the hood over her head, shadowing her face. "A vow of silence? That will be the hardest part of this entire mission." They moved through the station in small groups. The interior was a sensory assault. Markets overflowed with questionable goods, cybernetic limbs, unrefined ore, illicit spices. Music thumped from the open doors of cantinas, a jarring mix of heavy bass and synthesized flutes. The Illyri were wide-eyed. They had been soldiers and diplomats, used to clean lines and order. This was humanity at its messiest. They passed a food stall where a vendor was grilling tentacles of some unidentified sea creature. The smell was pungent. "Is that food?" one of the women whispered, horrified. "It's protein," Elias said. "Probably. Don't ask where it came from." Further down, a holographic billboard projected a giant rotating image of a furry creature in a cage, advertising a petting zoo. One of Lysera's lieutenants, a fierce warrior named Kalen, stopped. She stared at the hologram. "It is trapped," she murmured. "It's a recording, Kalen," Elias said. She didn't listen. She reached out to the hologram control panel and smashed it with her fist. The image flickered and died. "You are freed, little one," she whispered to the empty air. A shopkeeper shouted in protest. A small crowd began to gather. "Run!" Elias hissed. They ducked into a side alley, losing the angry merchant. Lysera was laughing, a sound that was half nerves, half joy. "We are terrible at being invisible," she said. "We need to find Mara," Elias said, checking his data pad. Before Kalen liberates a vending machine, Mara's office was in the back of a data repair shop. It was dark, cold, and smelled of stale smoke. Mara was a woman of indeterminate age with a cybernetic eye that whirred when she focused. She sat behind a desk piled high with memory cores. "Elias Ward," she said, her voice like grinding gears. "I thought you were dead, or promoted, which is worse." "I'm retired," Elias said, placing the stolen data drive on the desk. "And I need a favor." Mara picked up the drive. "This has Helios encryption, top tier. If I crack this, they'll put a bounty on my head so high I won't be able to buy a coffee without a sniper team showing up." Elias leaned forward. "If you crack this, the data inside will make the war look like a playground fight. You can short sell Helios stock before the market crashes. You'll be rich enough to buy the planet." Mara's cyber eye spun. She grinned, revealing silver teeth. "I always liked your optimism. Elias, it's so stupid." She slotted the drive. "Give me 4 hours, and get out of my shop. You smell like desperation and alien pheromones." They waited on the observation deck on the upper level. It was a quiet dome of glass overlooking the gas giant below. The planet was a swirling marble of sapphire and violet storms. Beautiful and violent. Most of the women were sleeping on the benches, exhausted by the sensory overload. Elias and Lysera stood by the glass. The station gravity was lower here. They felt light, unmoored. Lysera was looking at the planet, but her eyes were distant. "I keep seeing them," she said softly. "The ones behind the door." Elias didn't offer platitudes. He didn't say it wasn't your fault. He knew the weight of command. "We saved who we could," he said. "Will they welcome me back?" she asked, turning to him. Her hood had fallen back, revealing the sharp, elegant lines of her face. "I surrendered. I let them capture me. In my culture, an officer who surrenders is complicated. They might see me as tainted, a failure. They'll see a survivor," Elias said fiercely. "And what about you?" she asked. "You can never go back. You are a traitor to your race. You fed the enemy, you shot your commander." Elias looked at his reflection in the glass. He looked older, tired. But for the first time in years, he didn't hate the man staring back. "I didn't follow orders," he said. "On Theta Prime, I followed orders and a village burned, at the camp, feeding you. That was the first time I made a choice. My choice." He turned to her. It felt right. It was the only thing that has felt right in a decade. The space between them seemed to shrink. The low gravity made every movement fluid, dreamlike. Lysera stepped closer. She raised her arm. pulling back her sleeve. Along her inner forearm, a complex pattern of bioluminescence glowed with a steady, pulsing white light. It looked like a woven braid. "This is the Kera," she whispered. "The pattern of trust. It is what we show to those who have held our lives in their hands." She held her arm out to him. "Touch it." Elias hesitated. He knew enough about xenobiology to know that Illyri's skin was sensitive, that their light was an extension of their nervous system. To touch it was to touch a raw nerve. He reached out. His fingertips brushed the glowing pattern. It wasn't hot. It was electric. A hum of energy shot up his arm, bypassing his skin and vibrating in his chest. He felt an echo. He felt her fear, her exhaustion, but mostly he felt a profound, overwhelming gratitude. And underneath that, a heat that had nothing to do with gratitude. Lysera gasped softly, her eyes fluttering shut. Her hand came up to grip his wrist, holding him there. "Elias." She breathed. The sensation was intoxicating. It was a connection deeper than speech, deeper than skin. He stepped closer, his other hand coming up to cup her face. Her skin was smooth, cool, contrasting with the fire in his veins. She leaned into his touch. Her eyes opened, dark and swirling with violet desire. They drifted together, the low gravity pulling them into an embrace that felt inevitable. His forehead rested against hers. Their breaths mingled. He could feel the rapid flutter of her dual hearts against his chest. "Lysera," he whispered. She tilted her head, her lips parting. She was alien. She was the enemy. She was everything he was supposed to destroy, and she was the only thing in the universe he wanted to save. They were millimeters apart. The air crackled. A beep from Elias's comms unit shattered the silence. It was Mara. "I've got it." The broker's voice crackled, sounding tinny and far away. "And you are not going to like it. Get down here." They pulled apart. The separation was physical, a tearing sensation. Lysera looked at him, her chest heaving, her markings flashing a chaotic mix of blue and gold. She started, her voice shaking. "We have to go," Elias said, his voice rough. The moment hung there, unresolved, a ghost of what could have been, a promise, a threat. They turned and ran back to the lift, back in the shop. Mara looked pale. She was projecting a holographic document into the air. "It's not just the camp," Mara said, not looking up. "It's a blueprint." The hologram showed a timeline. Operation Red Dawn. Objective: simultaneous detonation of Illyri dirty bombs in 3 major human population centers. Perpetrator: Helios Black Ops, disguised. Goal: total war mobilization. Authorization of Planet Cracker-class weaponry. And here, Mara swiped to the next file. Illyri High Command, Shadow Council Agreement, acceptance of casualties in exchange for technology transfer from Helios. "Both sides," Elias whispered. "The leaders on both sides are in on it. They're trading cities like poker chips." Lysera stared at the file, her face devoid of color. "My government. They agreed to this? They agreed to let humans bomb our colonies so they could get... what? Better shield generators? They're prolonging the war to consolidate power," Mara said. "Peace is bad for business." "There is a date," Elias pointed out. "The document mentions the Unity Summit." Mara nodded. "It's in 3 days, at the Zenith Orbital Platform. It's supposed to be a peace talk." "It's a stage," Lysera realized. "They are going to use the summit to announce the failure of diplomacy. They'll stage an attack right there, on live feeds, to justify the final escalation." "We can run," Elias said. He looked at Lysera. "We can take the shuttle, go to the uncharted rim, disappear. We have the data. We can leak it from a distance. Leak it? Lysera laughed bitterly. Who will believe a leak? They control the networks. They will call it a forgery. They will call us terrorists. She looked at the map of the Zenith platform. We have to go there, she said. We have to be at the summit. That's suicide, Mara said. That platform will have more security than the Emperor's vault. We have to walk into the room, Lysera said, her voice rising with command. We have to stand in front of the cameras. Me, the dead envoy, and you, Elias, the human officer. We have to show them the files while we are standing there. They can't fake that. Elias looked at the map. It was madness. It was impossible. He looked at Lysera. He remembered the feel of her skin against his, the trust woven into her arm. We're going to need a better ship, Elias said to Mara. Mara sighed. I hate you both. I really do. She opened a drawer and pulled out a key card. I have a fast courier docked in Bay 4. It's off the books. Take it. And if you survive, you owe me a planet. Elias took the card. Let's go crash a party, he said. The courier ship Mara had provided was fast, ugly, and unregistered. It cut through the shipping lanes of the core systems like a rusted blade, indistinguishable from the thousands of other freighters hauling ore and atmosphere scrubbers to the heart of civilization. Ahead of them, the Helios Prime arcology dominated the view. It was not a station. It was a synthetic moon, a perfect sphere of glass and white durasteel. It orbited the local star with arrogant precision, tethered to the orbital mechanics by gravity generators that cost more than the GDP of entire colony worlds. This was the brain of the beast. This was where the war was managed, in the cramped cargo hold. Captain Elias Ward adjusted the collar of his gray maintenance jumpsuit. It was stiff, smelled of recycled starch, and bore the insignia of a third-party sanitation contractor. He looked at Lysera. She was standing by the airlock, staring into a reflective panel. The woman looking back was not Illyri. The hollow emitter Mara had secured for them, an illegal piece of tech usually used by assassins, masked her alien features. Gone was the translucent, pearlescent skin. Gone were the shimmering, bioluminescent wings across her shoulders and the delicate patterns on her throat. In the mirror, she was a human woman with brown skin, dark hair, and dull, flat eyes. It is suffocating, Lysera said, touching her face. Her hand passed through the hologram, but the image remained stable. I feel blind. Without the light of my kin, without the ability to project my mood, I am trapped in a box. It is just camouflage, Elias said, stepping up behind her. He resisted the urge to touch her shoulder, knowing the hollow field would glitch. Underneath, you are still you. I look like one of them, she murmured, turning to face him. I look like the people who starved us. You look like a sanitation tech named Sarah, Elias corrected gently. And right now, Sarah is going to help us burn this place to the ground. Lysera took a deep breath. She straightened her spine, adopting the heavier, more grounded posture of a human. Then let us go to work. Captain. The docking bay of the Helios arcology was a cathedral of commerce. The ceiling vaulted 300 meters overhead, transparent aluminum revealing the burning curve of the sun, statues of unity and progress. Muscular humans and idealized submissive aliens working together lined the walls. Elias, Lysera, and Valera, the Illyri architect who had insisted on coming, walked through the security checkpoints with a card of atmospheric filters. ID. The guard said. He was private security, wearing armor that made the standard military kit look like cardboard. Elias held up his wrist. The forged credentials Mara had coded flashed green. Sector 4 maintenance, Elias said, his voice bored. You guys have a blockage in the recirculation valves. Unless you want the executive levels to smell like sulfur, let us through. The guard wrinkled his nose. Go. Service elevator 3. They moved into the concourse. It was terrifyingly open. Drones buzzed overhead, scanning faces. Corporate executives in silk suits glided by on grav discs. Lysera was walking too smoothly. She moved like a dancer, like a predator. Slouch, Elias whispered out of the corner of his mouth. Humans stomp. We carry our weight in our heels. You look like you are floating. Lysera frowned beneath her disguise but forced herself to stumble slightly, rounding her shoulders. Is this better? She whispered back. I feel like I am carrying a sack of rocks. Perfect, Elias said. They reached the elevator banks. A group of junior executives was waiting. One of them, a young man with a headset, looked at Lysera. Nice day for a filter change, he said, making polite conversation. Lysera froze. She had studied human languages, tactics, and weapons. She had not studied small talk. It is a standard day, she said, her voice stiff and overly loud. The rotation of the station is within nominal parameters. I hope your nutrient consumption is efficient. The executive stared at her. She is new, Elias interjected quickly, grabbing Lysera's arm. Nervous. Come on. Sarah. He pulled her into the service lift and slapped the button for the lower levels. As the doors closed, Valera let out a muffled sound that might have been a laugh. Nutrient consumption? Elias hissed. I was trying to be polite, Lysera defended, her hollow face flushing a digital pink. You people talk about nothing. The weather is controlled. Why ask about it? Just let me do the talking, Elias said, checking the floor readout. We are going to the sub-basement. The server farm is cooled by the primary heat sinks. That is our way in. The data vault was not a room. It was a fortress buried in the center of the station. The temperature dropped to near freezing to keep the quantum processors stable. Rows of black monoliths stretched into the darkness, humming with the secret thoughts of the Helios Directorate. We have 10 minutes before the cycling routine notices the unauthorized maintenance, Elias said, plugging his datapad into a hardline port. Valera, watch the door. Lysera, I need your eyes. Lysera deactivated her holomask. The disguise flickered and vanished, revealing her true form. Her bioluminescence flared, relieved to be free, casting a soft violet light over the black servers. What am I looking for? She asked. Heat, Elias said, his fingers flying across his keypad. The secure servers run hotter. They have independent power sources. I can't see the thermal variance on my scanner, but you can see into the infrared. Lysera closed her eyes for a second, shifting her vision spectrum. When she opened them, the world was a map of temperature gradients. There, she pointed to a cluster of servers isolated behind a physical air gap. That bank. It is burning hot. Elias moved to the bank. This is it. The executive archives. He began the bypass. It wasn't brute force. It was surgery. He used the codes he had stolen from the prison camp, the back doors he had learned in intelligence, and the decryption algorithms Mara had provided. Layer by layer, the digital walls fell. Got you, he whispered. The screen lit up. It was a deluge of information. Financial transfers to Illyri warlords, blueprints for false flag bombings, and a folder marked Asset Management, Camp 49. Elias opened it, the screen filled with video thumbnails. He clicked one. It was footage from the camp. But it wasn't the graining security feed Elias was used to. It was high definition, cinematic. On the screen, Lysera was kneeling in the center of the cell block. It was from 3 months ago. She was thinner then, but unbroken. A human officer, Major Kincaid, was standing over her. "Tell us the codes," Kincaid's voice boomed from the speakers. "I have no codes," the on-screen Lysera replied, blood dripping from her mouth. "I have only pity for you." Kincaid struck her. It was a brutal, calculated backhand that snapped her head back. The camera zoomed in, catching the spray of violet blood, the way her markings flared white with pain. Elias froze. He felt a cold rage spread through his chest, turning his blood to ice. He looked at the real Lysera standing beside him. She was watching the screen. Her face was impassive, stone still, but her markings were rippling with a chaotic, dark storm of color. She was watching her own torture, packaged as entertainment. "Turn it off," Elias said, his hand hovering over the key. "No," Lysera said. Her voice was brittle. "Look at the timestamp." Elias looked. The timestamp was followed by a distribution code, Broadcast Package 4, Extremist Channels. "They sent this to my people," Lysera whispered. "They edited it. They removed the questions about codes. They made it look like he was beating you just because you are Illyri." Elias finished, sickened. "To make your people hate us, to make them fight harder. And here," Elias clicked another file, a video of Illyri soldiers executing human prisoners. "Distribution, Earth News Networks." "It is a loop," Lysera said, leaning against the server bank, her light dimming. "They beat me to make my people kill you. They film my people killing you to make you beat me. It is a machine that eats pain and prints money." Elias looked at her. He saw the scars on her spirit that the video couldn't show. He felt a protective tenderness so fierce it almost knocked the wind out of him. He wanted to burn this entire station down. He wanted to find every person who had watched that video and make them pay. "I'm sorry," he said. The words inadequate. "I am so sorry. Copy it," Lysera said, turning away from the screen. "Copy it all. We are going to shove this down their throats." Elias keyed the transfer command. The progress bar began to fill, 50%. The door to the server room hissed open. Valera shouted a warning, but it was cut short by the thrum of a stun bolt. She collapsed to the floor, twitching. Elias spun around, drawing his pistol. Standing in the doorway was a man in a pristine white dress uniform. He was older, his hair silver, his face lined with the kind of wisdom that usually commanded respect. Colonel Havel, Elias's instructor at the academy. The man who had taught him that an officer's first duty is to the truth. "Elias," Havel said, his voice disappointed, like a father catching a son smoking. "I expected better tradecraft from you. Using the heat sinks? That is a cadet trick." "Havel," Elias said, keeping his gun trained on the man. "I should have known. You always did say the private sector pays better. It's not about the pay." "Elias," Havel said, stepping into the room. He was unarmed, or appeared to be. He walked with the confidence of a man who owned the building. "It's about stability." "Stability?" Elias gestured to the screen behind him, where the torture footage was still paused. "You call this stability?" "I call it necessary pressure," Havel said calmly. "Look at the galaxy. Elias, before the war, humanity was fracturing. The colonies were rebelling. The Illyri were stagnating in their spiral philosophies. We were two dying empires drifting toward irrelevance. He stopped 10 feet away. But now, technology has jumped 50 years in a decade. Our economies are booming. We are united against a common threat. Fear. Elias. Fear is the only thing that keeps civilizations from eating themselves. We provide the fear. We manage it. You murder people, Lysera said. She stepped out from behind the server bank. Her hollow mask was off. She glowed in the dark room. An avenging angel. Ah, Havel said, looking at her with cold appreciation. The envoy. I see Elias has fallen for the exotic tragic narrative. It is a classic trap. Son, she is manipulating you. Do not speak to him, Lysera warned, her hands curling into fists. She is a weapon. Elias, Havel continued, ignoring her. Look at her. She is biologically engineered to elicit an emotional response. The big eyes, the light shows. You are betraying your species for a biological trick. Elias looked at Havel. He remembered the lectures on ethics. He remembered the medals Havel wore. And he realized that the man he had admired was just another suit of armor with nothing inside. She is not a trick, Elias said, his voice steady. She is the person who reminded me what honor looks like. Something you forgot a long time ago. Havel sighed. He tapped a command on his wrist link. Then you are a liability. The shadows behind Havel moved. 2 cloaked Helios operatives decloaked, their armor shifting from invisible to matte black. They held shock batons. Take the drive, Havel ordered. Kill the alien. Keep Elias alive. I want to deconstruct his conditioning. The operatives lunged. Elias fired. The kinetic round sparked off the lead operative's armor. Run! Elias shouted. Lysera didn't run. She moved. She launched herself at the operative on the left. She was unarmored, unarmed and smaller. But she had the rage of 3 months in a cage. She slid under the swing of the baton, grabbing the operative's wrist. Her markings flared white. She twisted, using the Illyri torque throw she had used on Kincaid. The operative's arm snapped with a wet crunch. He screamed, dropping the weapon. Elias tackled the second operative, slamming him into a server rack. The man was stronger, augmented. He threw Elias back like a rag doll. Elias hit the floor, his pistol skittering away. Havel stepped forward, drawing a sleek silver energy pistol. He aimed at Lysera, who was grappling with the wounded operative. Enough, Havel said. Elias saw the finger tighten on the trigger. No! Elias scrambled, grabbing a loose power cable from the open server panel. He whipped it outward. The live end struck the metal floor plate Havel was standing on. Current arced. Havel convulsed as 40,000 volts surged through his boots. He fired wildly, the shot burning a hole in the ceiling, and collapsed. The remaining operative turned on Elias, raising his baton for a killing blow. Lysera was there. She had snatched the fallen baton from the first man. She didn't hesitate. She drove the electrified tip into the gap in the operative's armor, right at the neck. The man dropped. Silence fell over the room, broken only by the hum of the servers and the smell of ozone. Valera groaned, stirring by the door. Elias scrambled to the console. The transfer was at 100%. He yanked the drive free. We have to go, he gasped, clutching his ribs. Security will be here in seconds. Lysera stood over Havel. The colonel was twitching, conscious but paralyzed. She looked down at him. You say fear keeps us united, she whispered. Let us see how united you are when the truth comes out. She turned to Elias. The maintenance shafts. They grabbed Valera, who was groggy but mobile, and sprinted for the rear access panel. As they pried it open, the main blast doors of the server room began to melt. They were cutting through. Into the chute, Elias ordered. They slid down the dark, greased metal of the disposal shaft, tumbling through the guts of the station. They emerged into a waste processing bay near the exterior hull. Escape pods. Elias panted, pointing to a row of orange spheres. They shoved Valera into the first one. Launch! Elias hit the manual release. The pod shot away. Elias and Lysera scrambled into the second pod. It was designed for one person. It was a sphere of reinforced plastic barely 2 meters across. Elias dove in. Lysera squeezed in on top of him. He hit the launch button. Explosive bolts fired. The pod was kicked away from the station with bone-jarring force. Through the small viewport, they saw the arcology recede rapidly, but the station was waking up. Red lights strobed across its surface. Alert. Launch detection. The pod's computer chirped. Hostile lock. They are firing on us, Lysera said, staring out the window. Elias checked the pod's controls. There were no controls. It was a dumbfire life raft. We're just a target, he said, watching a squadron of interceptor drones peel away from the station's patrol grid. The pod tumbled through the void. Inside, it was intimate, terrifying. Elias and Lysera were pressed together, limbs tangled in the cramped space. The emergency lighting bathed them in a pulsing red glow. The proximity alarm began to scream. A missile lock. This is it, Elias thought. We have the truth, and we're going to burn up with it. Lysera looked at him. Her disguise was gone. Her hair was wild, her face flushed with adrenaline and heat. She didn't look at the missiles. She looked at him. Elias, she said. Her voice was steady, cutting through the wail of the alarm. He looked at her. He saw the woman who had defied an empire from a cage. He saw the only thing that made sense. If we burn, she whispered, gripping the front of his jumpsuit, we burn together. The inevitability of death stripped away the last defenses. The soldier and the diplomat, the human and the alien, the guard and the prisoner, it all evaporated. Elias didn't think. He didn't weigh the consequences. He reached up, his hands tangling in her hair, pulling her down. Lysera met him halfway. The kiss was a collision. It was desperate, fueled by the terror of the missile lock and the weeks of suppressed longing. It tasted of adrenaline and copper. It wasn't gentle. It was acclaiming. Lysera's markings flared so bright they illuminated the pod with blinding white light, washing out the red emergency strobe. Elias felt the heat of her skin, the electric hum of her nervous system vibrating against his own. He pressed her closer, trying to merge their atoms, trying to defy the vacuum outside with the sheer heat of their connection. In that moment, the boundaries of species didn't exist. There was only the frantic, terrified need to be close, to be one thing before the end. The pod shuddered violently. Elias broke the kiss, gasping, shielding her body with his own, waiting for the fire. It didn't come. He looked at the sensor display. The interceptor drones were peeling off. Why? Lysera breathed, her forehead resting against his chest, her heart's hammering against his ribs. Elias looked out the viewport. A massive shadow had fallen over them. Looming ahead was the Zenith Summit Station. It was huge, a city in space, bristling with the defensive fleets of both the United Earth Coalition and the Aeleri Dominion. We crossed the line, Elias realized, laughing breathlessly. We're in the diplomatic demilitarized zone. The Helios drones can't fire here without starting a war with the entire Aeleri fleet. They were safe, or as safe as they could be. The pod drifted toward the station's automated recovery nets. Inside the cramped sphere, the silence returned, heavy and sweet. They were still entangled, their bodies pressed together. Lysera pulled back slightly, looking at him. Her light had softened to a warm, pulsing gold. She reached up and touched his lips, tracing the shape of them as if memorizing a map. We are alive, she said, sounding surprised. We are, Elias said. He looked at the data drive clutched in his hand. Now comes the hard part, he said. Lysera nodded. She didn't move away. She stayed close, her heat seeping into him. We will face them, she said. But first, she leaned in and kissed him again. This time, it wasn't desperate. It was a promise. It was soft, lingering and possessive. First, we breathe. The pod thudded into the recovery bay of the summit station. The clamps engaged. Elias Ward and Lysera prepared to step out into the center of the galaxy's greatest lie, holding the only weapon that mattered. "Ready?" Elias asked, his hand on the hatch release. Lysera's markings flared a brilliant, defiant azure. Always. The Zenith orbital platform was a masterpiece of political theater suspended in the vacuum. It was a glittering wheel of spun glass and white titanium, rotating slowly above the galactic plane, designed to intimidate as much as to accommodate. Inside the grand atrium, the air smelled of expensive perfumes, polished leather, and the ozone tang of high-grade force fields. Delegations from the United Earth Coalition and the Aleri Dominion mingled in a space that had been mathematically designed to enforce neutrality, yet the tension was thick enough to choke on. Human generals in dress grays stood stiffly beside Aleri matriarchs in flowing ceremonial robes, clutching crystal goblets of sparkling nectar and avoiding eye contact. Moving through the crowd with the predatory grace of sharks were the representatives of the Helios Directorate. They wore suits of midnight blue silk, their smiles practiced and cold. They were not there to negotiate peace. They were there to sell the necessity of war. Director Vane, the architect of the new security accords, stood at the podium in the center of the atrium. Behind him, a massive holographic display projected images of burning cities and weeping children. Images carefully curated to justify the document he was about to ask both species to sign. "We stand at the precipice," Vane's voice boomed, amplified by the station's acoustic dampeners to sound rich and authoritative. "The enemy is relentless. Their hatred is biological. Only through total surveillance, through the unyielding strength of the Helios defense grid, can we ensure that our children wake up tomorrow." The room was silent. Fear, managed and packaged, was working its magic. In the shadows of the maintenance gantry, 3 levels above the atrium, Captain Elias Ward and Lysera crouched behind a ventilation duct. They were filthy, smelling of burnt circuitry and escape pod coolant. Elias held a data pad that was hardwired into the station's primary junction box. Lysera stood tall, her disguise discarded, her Aleri features sharp and terrifyingly beautiful in the dim light. "Are you ready?" Elias asked, his voice a rough whisper. Lysera looked down at the gathering, the generals who had ordered her death, the diplomats who had ignored it, and the corporation that had profited from it. Her bioluminescent markings flared with a steady, white-hot brilliance. "They think I am a ghost," she said. "Let us haunt them." She tapped the comms link Mara had decrypted for them. In the atrium below, the audio system let out a piercing screech of feedback. Director Vane paused, tapping his microphone in annoyance. The holographic feed behind him flickered, the image of the burning city dissolving into static. Then, a voice cut through the noise. It was not the smooth baritone of the director. It was a voice of harmonic resonance, layered with the undeniable authority of the Aleri high caste. "There is no security in a cage built by liars," the voice said. The crowd murmured, heads turned. Security guards reached for their sidearms, scanning the balconies. "Who is that?" Vane demanded. "Cut the feed!" The static on the massive screen cleared. It did not return to the director's presentation. Instead, it showed a live feed from the gantry. Lysera stepped to the railing. She was projected 50 feet tall behind the director, a looming figure of judgment. Her skin glowed with the undeniable patterns of the Envoy Corps, the very people whose murder had started the war. "I am Lysera of the Third Circle," she announced, her voice echoing through the station. "I was the envoy sent to bring peace. I was not killed by extremists. I was stolen, I was sold, and I was starved. Pandemonium rippled through the room. Illyri matriarchs dropped their glasses. Human officers stared, recognizing the face from the intelligence briefings of the dead. "Kill it!" Vane screamed, pointing up at the gantry. "It is a trick, a deep fake." Elias hit the enter key on his datapad. "Now! Mara!" he said into his headset. The screen flickered again. Lysera's face vanished, replaced by the files they had stolen from the Helios arcology. The atrium went dark, save for the light of the screen. The video began to play. It was the footage from the camp, the bleak, colorless cell block, the skeletal figures of the Illyri women. The date stamp was clearly visible, footage taken during the height of the war, in a facility marked with the Helios sunburst. The audience watched in horrified silence as a human officer, Major Kincaid, ordered the rations destroyed. They watched the women curl together on the floor, their light dimming to near extinction. Then came the moment that would break the galaxy. The camera showed Elias, looking younger and haunted, sliding bowls of warm porridge through the hatch. It showed the women recoiling in fear, then realizing what it was. The audio was crisp. The whisper of the Illyri prisoner cut through the silence of the summit station like a knife. A week without food. The woman on the screen rasped. Then, the weeping began. The raw, ugly, beautiful sound of starving women crying because they were being fed. In the atrium, a human admiral looked down at the plate of hors d'oeuvres in his hand. He set it down on a table, his face pale. An Illyri matriarch covered her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. The video cut to the staged attacks. A split screen showed the news footage of an atrocity next to the raw file of the Helios production team applying makeup to the actors and setting the explosive charges. "This is what you are buying," Lysera's voice roared over the speakers, narrating the horror. "You trade your freedom for protection, and they sell you your own nightmares." Helios security teams stormed the gantry. Doors burst open on the upper level. Elias drew his pistol, standing in front of Lysera. "They are coming," he shouted. "Let them come," Lysera said, not stepping back. "They are too late." On the screen, financial records began to scroll, waterfalls of credit transfers linking the Helios Directorate to the private accounts of half the people in the room. Human senators, Illyri counselors. The architects of the war were stripped naked in front of their people. Director Vane was shouting into his comms, ordering a station-wide blackout. But the system was locked. Mara had mirrored the signal. The broadcast wasn't just in the atrium. It was beaming to every ship in the fleet, every colony world in the sector, every news terminal on Earth and Prime. Billions of people were watching the starving women cry. The doors to the gantry blew inward. Armored troops poured in. Elias fired 2 warning shots, but there were too many of them. He felt a stun baton slam into his ribs, dropping him to his knees. "No!" Lysera shouted, throwing herself over him. The guards swarmed them, dragging them apart. Elias saw a boot coming toward his face, and then darkness. The detention block of the Zenith station was not designed for comfort, but it was also not a black site. The eyes of the galaxy were watching now, and no one dared to make the prisoners disappear. Elias sat in a white room, his hands cuffed to the table. He had a split lip and 3 broken ribs, Pune. But he felt a strange, light-headed calm. The door opened. A joint tribunal team entered, a human judge advocate and an Illyri inquisitor. They looked exhausted. "Captain Ward," the judge advocate said, sitting down. "You have caused a significant diplomatic incident." "I call it a status report," Elias said, wincing as he shifted in his chair. The Illyri inquisitor leaned forward. Her eyes were dark, searching. "The data has been verified. The Directorate is collapsing. Their stock has plummeted to 0. Director Vane has been arrested by his own security detail. Good, Elias said. But that does not absolve you, the Inquisitor said sharply. You are a traitor to your uniform. You aided the enemy. You stole classified material. I fed starving women, Elias corrected. If that is treason, then the uniform is wrong. The door to the observation room was transparent. Elias looked through it and saw Lysera in the adjacent room. She was being questioned by her own people. She looked tired, but regal. She met his gaze through the glass and offered a small, tired smile. The hearings were broadcast live. There was no way to hide them. Lysera stood before the High Council of the Dominion. She wore a simple gray tunic, refusing the ceremonial robes they offered her. Why did you trust him? The High Matriarch asked, her voice trembling with a mix of fury and shame. He is a human. A killer. He was a human, Lysera answered, her voice ringing clear in the silence of the chamber. But when he looked at us in that cell, he did not see aliens. He did not see assets. He saw hunger. She looked directly into the camera, addressing the billions watching. We have spent 10 years learning to hate. We have burned their worlds, and they have burned ours. We told ourselves they were monsters so we could sleep at night. But monsters do not risk their rank, their freedom, and their lives to carry warm porridge to a prisoner. She paused, her markings pulsing with a soft, honest blue. The war ended for me the moment he opened that hatch. The lie broke, and once the lie breaks, you cannot put it back together. Elias's turn came the next day. The human military tribunal was grim-faced. They were trying a man who was simultaneously a hero and a traitor. Captain Ward, the prosecutor said, you admit to sabotaging a military operation, to assaulting a superior officer, to leaking state secrets. I admit it, Elias said calmly. Why? The prosecutor asked. You had a stellar record. You were a patriot. What changed? I found something worth fighting for, Elias said. And what was that? The alien? Elias looked at the prosecutor. He thought of the way Lysera's hand felt in his. He thought of the trust pattern on her arm. He thought of the way she had looked in the escape pod, willing to burn with him. I fell in love, Elias said. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The prosecutor blinked, taken aback. With the enemy? With the truth, Elias said. And yes, with her. My loyalty became personal, and because it was personal, it was honest. I did not serve a flag. I served a life, and I would do it again. The silence that followed was heavy. It was the sound of old paradigms shattering against the weight of a simple, undeniable human reality. The verdict took weeks. It was a political tightrope walk. They could not execute the couple that had just saved the galaxy from a corporate meat grinder, but they could not pin medals on them either. In the end, the system compromised. Elias was dishonorably discharged and stripped of rank, but granted immunity from prosecution. Lysera was relieved of her commission but appointed as a civilian liaison for the reconstruction effort. Helios did not get off so lightly. The trials of the Directorate executives were swift and brutal. The evidence Elias and Lysera had stolen was irrefutable. Weeping jurors watched the footage of the camps. Mobs surrounded the courthouses demanding blood. Major Kincaid turned state's evidence to save his own neck, testifying against his superiors. He disappeared into a witness protection program, a ghost in the machine, proving that justice is rarely perfect. Colonel Havel, recovering from his electrocution, suffered a cardiac event in his cell before he could testify. The shadow of power shifted, changed shape, but the head of the snake had been cut off. The war did not end overnight. There were no parades. There was just a slow, grinding halt to the shooting. Ships stopped firing, borders became porous. The hate didn't vanish, but it lost its funding. 6 months later, the sky over the colony world of Ethelgard, Lysera's home, was a bruised purple, streaked with the contrails of atmospheric scrubbers. The city was a patchwork of ruins and new, hasty construction. In a small, prefab modular house on a ridge overlooking the valley, the air smelled of burning spices. Elias stood at the stove, frowning at a pan. He was wearing civilian clothes, a loose shirt and trousers that felt strange after decades of uniforms. "Damn it," he muttered, poking at a charred black lump. Lysera walked in from the terrace. She looked healthier now. Her skin had regained its luminous pearl sheen, and the hollows of her face were filled. She wore a simple tunic, her arms bare, displaying the trust patterns that glowed softly in the twilight. She stopped, sniffing the air, her nose wrinkled. "You are making the poison again?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe. "It is not poison," Elias said defensively, scraping the burnt bit off the protein patty. "It is a fusion dish. Earth spices, Illyri grain. It represents the duality of our existence. It represents arson," Lysera teased. She walked over to him, peering into the pan. She flinched slightly as the smoke hit her, a reflex from the fire that had taken her city years ago. Elias noticed. He immediately turned off the burner and stepped between her and the stove, his movements gentle. "It's okay," he said softly. "It's just dinner." Lysera relaxed, her marking shifting from a startled gray back to a warm amber. She looked up at him. "I know," she said. Elias plated the food. It looked terrible. He carried it to the small table by the window. "Sit," he commanded playfully. They sat. Lysera picked up her fork, a human utensil she was still mastering, and poked the food. "You promised me I would never be hungry again," she said, eyeing the burnt patty. "This tests that promise." Elias laughed. He cut a piece of his own and ate it. He grimaced, then smiled. "It's edible. Barely. But it's ours." Lysera took a bite. She chewed slowly, her expression thoughtful. "It is crunchy," she decided. "We're workshopping the texture," Elias said. They ate in silence for a moment, watching the twin moons rise over the valley. It was a peaceful silence, but it was heavy with the knowledge of what lay outside their door. "They stare at you in the market," Lysera said quietly. "The humans. They call you turncoat." "I know," Elias said. "And your people look at you like you're broken, like you've been tainted by the human touch." Lysera reached across the table and took his hand. Her skin was cool, her grip strong. "Let them stare," she said fiercely. "We are the scar tissue. Elias." "The scar is always tougher than the skin it replaced." Elias squeezed her hand. "We're building something new. Lysera, it's going to be messy. It's going to be hard. Like this dinner?" She smiled. "Exactly like this dinner," he agreed. "But we aren't starving. Later." They walked out onto the hillside. The night air was cool and smelled of damp earth and alien flowers that opened only in the dark. Above them, the sky was busy. A convoy of relief ships was descending from orbit. They were bulky freighters, painted white. Some bore the markings of Earth, others the spiral sigils of the Dominion. They were flying in formation, wingtip to wingtip, bringing grain and medicine to the refugee camps in the southern hemisphere. It was a sight that would have been impossible a year ago. Lysera watched them, her face illuminated by the passing running lights of the ships. "They are working together," she whispered. "The pilots. They have to coordinate their vectors. They have to talk to each other." "It starts with logistics," Elias said. the old quartermaster in him speaking. You share a supply chain. Eventually you share a drink. Then you share a joke. Then you realize you don't want to shoot each other anymore. Lysera turned to him. The wind caught her hair, whipping it around her face. She looked vibrant, alive, and infinitely precious. She took his hand, lifting it to her face. She turned his palm upward and began to trace a line along his wrist with her index finger. A trail of light followed her touch, a temporary bioluminescent transfer that left a glowing golden spiral on his human skin. "What is this?" Elias asked, watching the light bloom on his own arm. "It is a new pattern," Lysera said softly. "The old patterns are for tribe, for caste, for rank. This one I made for us." She traced the line up his forearm, over the scar where Kincaid had crushed his hand, up to his pulse point. "It means those who walk between," she explained. "It means we do not belong to the earth or the sky. We belong to the horizon." Elias felt the hum of her energy seep into his bones. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her waist. She rested her head on his shoulder, her wings glowing softly against the night. "The horizon is a long way off," Elias murmured into her hair. "Then we better keep walking," Lysera said. "Below them, in the valley." A news terminal flickered in a shop window. The headline scrolled across the screen. "Former Helios assets rebrand as Apex Security. New contracts signed in Outer Rim." The darkness hadn't gone away. The greed hadn't vanished. The people who fed on war were regrouping, finding new names, new masks. The galaxy was vast, and memory was short. But as Elias looked at the convoy of ships streaking overhead, delivering life instead of death, he tightened his hold on the woman who had taught him how to see in the dark. They would be ready. They had the truth. They had each other. And for the first time in a long time, they had enough to eat. "We have work to do tomorrow," Elias said. "The convoy needs a coordination chief, and a diplomat," Lysera added. They stood together on the hillside, two specks of light against the encroaching dark, watching the future arrive one crate at a time.